In a lab, we're going to turn to Andrew. He's going to help us work the cuff and all that sort of fun. He's shaking his head. No. Okay. Yeah. 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 Okay. So, blood pressure. One of the things that we've tried to talk about is how this is letting us know what is that force being exerted when the blood leaves the heart. We know that when the heart beats, it's forcing the blood out. It's under tremendous pressure into that aorta, and then it remains under pressure until it enters the capillary bed. It remains under pressure until it meets the venous system, where the pressures change drastically. We usually measure it with a sphygmomanometer. Say that 10 times. Usually by way of the brachial artery. Put the cuff on, then you got the little thing, and then they got, the stuff in their ears, and then they start blowing it up, okay? Or you decide to go to one of them machines where you're gonna sit down and, put your arm in, and it feels like it's gonna cut your arm off right there, okay? Or you got the one that gets hooked up to you, and it's electric, and it's like every 15 minutes, because you can only do it once every 15 minutes in the same arm, okay? And then, 15 minutes, woo, okay, get a reading, that sort of thing. The pressures, okay? Systolic, diastolic. Those terms familiar to you? Okay. Systolic. What is the peak pressure in that artery during that contraction of the heart? When the heart pushes that blood out. For our purposes, we have been told that that number for the youth, they like to see it about roughly 110. My age, they like to see it about 120. Probably another 10 years for me, they're going to be happy if that number's that. All right? That means that the force that the blood is leaving my heart can move that mercury ball 110 millimeters, 120, or 130 up the tube, which is a great pressure. Trust me on that. Now, the diastolic. What is the minimum pressure that's in that artery when the ventricle relaxes? So, for the youth, they're hoping 110 over 70. Age I am now, they would like for it to be 70, but happy if it's 80. When I get about 10 years more, they're going to hope to see that. Now, that would pretty much fall under a norm that they tell us exists, okay? The difference between these two should be my pulse pressure. All right, something that basically what happens to my small arteries, such as what you would feel here. Okay? Basically, they count your pulse. Difference between them, 120, let's say 120 over 80, 60, hopefully my pulse would be somewhere in the 60s range for the beats, pulses. Now, this one right here, mean arterial pressure. What does that term mean? The average. Okay? They use MAP, mean arterial pressure, for a measure of stress on my blood vessels.
So how would they take that? Just like taking it like a number of times during the day?
They would be putting it into some mathematical equations. Yeah.
And it's systolic pressure plus 2 times diastolic pressure divided by 3.
Which is why I didn't want you to have to worry about the math. Okay? But yeah, they would be putting it into a mathematical equation. Now, what they're trying to figure out, okay, stress on blood vessels. They're looking for it in terms of small blood vessels. Now, Genova, what kind would they be looking for that information for?
For the map, to see how much all the organs are being confused and used for separate.
So they're looking for it at the level of our capillaries.
The mean arterial pressure?
Yes. Because we can't really check that pressure, all right? That's a pressure that we have to put into that equation. But the importance of it, okay, the clinical significance, people who have certain diseases, certain disorders, okay, their organs are going to be more at risk for damage because of the blood flow, okay? For example, people who have high blood pressure, chronic high blood pressure, all right? Something they've had to deal with for years. What are some of the systems of the body that get affected if they have the chronic high blood pressure that's been very difficult for them to control? Their kidneys, their eyes. All right? Now, you're going to find out when we move to the chapter on the kidneys why it's such a problem for people who have chronic high blood pressure. For the eyes, when you begin to look at the structure of the eyes, the vessels are very tiny. And if you have a chronic high blood pressure problem, that means that that contraction of the heart is very strong, and the blood coming off of it is greater than the pressure it should have, and therefore, as it continues to move through the vessels, that means pressure remains high. When you get to those smaller vessels do not have the elastic tissue that the other vessels do. And therefore, that continued pulse of the high pressure blood bursts the vessels. And it can begin to affect the eyes. So, this blood pressure, okay, is important. This one right here, ever heard of an aneurysm? Okay, what is it?
So something popping in the brain.
Something probably
can kill you.
can kill you. Andrew?
So when the vessel bursts.
The blood vessel bursts. Which one? Artery or vein?
Artery.
Artery. What happens is, with an aneurysm, under these blood pressure issues, if there is a defect in that blood vessel, that will cause the artery to continue to expand and expand, and the recoil gets less and less, and the blood continues to fill up that area, and eventually it can burst. So aneurysms, not good either. So blood pressure is very clinically significant.
With the systolic pressure, you said that was the amount of force it took to raise the mercury ball up the tube.
Yes, well, both pressures, okay, whether you look at systolic or
That's the
diastolic,
same thing.
it's based on moving that mercury ball.
That was my question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And it's based upon early days, okay, before we knew about mercury being a heavy metal and being toxic to us and blah, blah, blah. Mercury is responsive to certain mechanisms, okay? And the pressure with the air, for example, taking blood pressure, it was responsive to heat. I don't know if any of you grew up with the glass thermometer that had the mercury that would move up it and, you know, put it in your mouth, but you had to keep it there for like 3-4 minutes, and then you would see how far it moved up the tube, okay? That was mercury. That's what we were being exposed to. But hey, that's what I grew up with my whole life. I'm okay. So to speak.
Did they still even sell this?
No, I don't think so. Rectally, yeah, for the rectal.
I used to break them so I could see the mercury.
And I don't know, we ain't gonna go there.
When you were for aneurysms, can they happen anywhere in your body?
Yes.
But is it deadly in your brain or is it
It's
deadly?
deadly anywhere. People can have an abdominal aneurysm where basically the aorta, as it goes through the arch and it begins to become the descending aorta, it's very common to have an abdominal aorta, meaning that aorta running the entire length of your abdominal and
Is it instant?
no. For the most part, the abdominal aneurysm usually gets detected at a physical, and then they'll do like scans and tests and stuff, and then they'll begin to watch it. Like every so often you'll need to go have tests done. If it's possible, they can try to go in and resect it by surgery. Now, the ones that occur in the brain,
Well, I knew someone who
sometimes,
died, just fell to the ground. That was it.
right, sometimes they can be detected. Like people will have certain symptoms of them, which for the most part is a severe headache, okay? A lot of times people mistake it for a migraine, and that's why they won't go to the doctor and have things checked out, okay? Because if it is just a migraine, great. But you want to know, okay, is there something wrong with the blood flow to my brain, all right? And so if they'll go to the doctor, let the doctor do some tests just to make sure vessels are okay, all right? Great, take your Excedrin migraine and go on about life, all right? But sometimes people don't do that, and yes, when it does burst, it is instant and most likely death.
Even like the ones in the brain, when they detect them, oftentimes they can't treat them.
Oftentimes they can't do anything about it. However, You can do lifestyle changes to keep your stress levels down and keep the pressures from being high in the brain.
So I was gonna ask that there is something to be said about like when people are like stress raising blood pressure.
Oh, yeah. When I say stress will kill you, stress will kill you.
So do your other vessels just compensate, or in the case of death, they aren't able to, and you have tissue death and just that?
No, most likely in the case of an aneurysm, it's just there. And we know now what happens. We just know that it has to be monitored. And if it's possible to go in and do surgery to correct it, we do it. But a lot of times the only thing they can do is tell that person at some point it's going to burst and you're going to die.
Wait, so I know like somebody who was like 24 years old, it was like sitting there and just died from a brain aneurysm. What is it? Just like, how does someone at 24 years old have, well, I guess you can have that much stress, I guess possibly college, but
Now, it doesn't necessarily have
not
to
all
be.
is stress, then what else
It's
is it?
probably a defect in the vessels. So it could have been congenital, it could have been hereditary, it could have been mechanical. Maybe they had had a concussion at some point in their life. It's anything that could lead to the weakening of that vessel. So age doesn't matter. Yeah, unfortunately, age doesn't matter. But take a break, be back at 9:30.